Welcome back to the Hardware Unbox podcast for episode 84. Steve and myself have been very bad boys. We have done bad things. We're going to be talking about some of the comments on videos that we received and all the naughty stuff we did. And then we're going to talk about some of the other videos we've made. So B580 overhead stuff, FSR 4 running on RDNA 3, and some other interesting topics. So yeah, let's get into it. I hate to break it to you, Steve, but we have committed more internet crimes that we are going to have to apologize for this week and make excuses for. I know our content just never pleases everyone, and it's happened again. And in fact, it's happened to a video I made, and it's happened to last week's podcast where we talked about APUs. People are very upset about a couple of things. So I want to start off by talking about the Borderlands 3 versus Borderlands 4 video. So people are very upset that in that video, I tested Borderlands 3 without DLSS and Borderlands 4 with DLSS.
I did see an overwhelming amount of comments about this. So I was wondering if you were going to address that in any capacity. So here we go.
Here we go, right here in the podcast. So yeah, I mean, obviously that was a purposeful decision and something that I would make the exact same decision again, despite what people have said. So the real reason behind this is, well, there's a couple of reasons really. The first is that it's not a GPU review. Like we're not testing, I think in the video I tested a 5060 Ti versus a RTX 2060, sort of showing like same comparisons of similar GPUs from the time those games were released. We're not actually reviewing the GPUs. We're not really reviewing the performance. It's meant to be a real configuration sort of test to sort of show how people might have played these games at the time that they were launched. Or, you know, today, if you had a 5060 Ti, you'd play Borderlands 3 on max settings because you just can't, like GPUs support that. So it's meant to be more of a real configuration test. And with that in mind, Borderlands 4 supports upscaling, Borderlands 3 does not. So if Borderlands 3 supported DLSS, we would have used it. I think most gamers, if they were talking about it like a real configuration that you would use for each of these games, you would be using upscaling with Borderlands 4 and you would not be using it with Borderlands 3 because it just doesn't support it at all. So when we're talking about real configurations, what does the game do? How does the game look? What are the features in the game, which was sort of the point of the video? One of the things that Borderlands 4 has is upscaling. One of the things Borderlands 4 does not have is upscaling. So there's that angle. Then there's sort of like, well, you know, DLSS 4 quality does look better than native TAA, especially if you're playing at a lower resolution. We've tested these technologies in depth, so this isn't like a sort of a whim or a guess at that. We've kind of shown and proven that. And especially when you look closely in that video, it's sort of, what's the image quality like for the Borderlands 4 side versus Borderlands 3? Borderlands 3 was using TAA. Borderlands 4 is clearly sharper and better, like in that sense, like the resolution, the crispness, sharpness, the lack of blur is better using DLSS 4. So there's kind of that thing. And then, you know, we're testing sort of things like the scaling of quality settings in the game. I don't really think it would make much sense to, you know, enable low settings, but then not use upscaling. So in that comparison where we're sort of looking at the Borderlands 4 plus low settings compared to the maximum settings in Borderlands 3 to sort of show like how much performance can you get out of Borderlands 4 and does that match the maximum quality in Borderlands 3? I think if you were going for low settings, you probably would be enabling upscaling. I don't really see why you would use native plus low. And then with things like the badass testing, I mean, we're sort of just having a realistic look at how mid-range gamers would play. Borderlands 3, you can comfortably run without upscaling at all. And then the kind of point of the video is that Borderlands 4, you can't do that, even with upscaling. And so, yeah, just testing native versus native, it wouldn't really have had any sort of impact on the video or its conclusions. Obviously, half the video was just going through like, what are the sort of things that make Borderlands 4 super intensive? And we probably would have received the opposite complaints, really. Like, why weren't you using DLSS 4 when it's in Borderlands 4? So I think people were upset because maybe we didn't punish Borderlands 4 hard enough by sort of showing native versus native performance. Like, I felt like I showed Borderlands 4's performance to be pretty bad, but people wanted, I guess, like another level of bad on top of that.
I think that's the comment section, though, like, and sort of a problem with the internet and the comments, which often represent a vocal minority. Because first of all, the vast majority of people who watch a YouTube video don't comment on it. And then, the people that do, you do get a lot of good comments, which is great. But then you also hear, you're more likely, I guess what I'm getting towards is hear negative feedback rather than good job, Tim, that must have taken a lot of effort and it's unique content that I hadn't seen anywhere else. So thanks for doing that. You're less likely to get that, and you're more likely to get the people who are upset and they want to let you know about it. And that's probably more what their personality lends towards. And then those types of people, which I think, again, it's a vocal minority. I think this represents a very small percentage of the viewership. But of that small percentage, you cannot be extreme enough. It doesn't matter what the topic is. If you're not supporting their ideas or what they believe in, well, and even if you are, you can't be doing extreme enough. Like, you have to go to the extreme. So you have to be like shitting on Borderlands 4 as hard as you can. You have to be giving it, every disadvantage basically, because they hate the game. They're offended by how unoptimized it is, and they just want to see you just wrecking it. And the fact that you're agreeing with them that it's unoptimized, you're essentially like, your narrative's somewhat aligned, but yours just isn't extreme enough. It's like, you could have done better. You could have made it worse. Like, you could have made the performance worse. Why didn't you? And I saw people like calling you a shill, saying this is like a cover-up job for the developer and stuff, and they've clearly paid you. It's like, there is no way they've paid you to say the game is unoptimized and could be a lot better and is ultimately disappointing. Like, but again, you just cannot be extreme enough for some people on certain topics like this. So but at the end of the day, it's one of the classic, lose-lose type situations, because as you said, if you tested without DLSS, which I think would be unfairly representing how people should be playing the game, you'll be attacked for doing so. And I think in that instance, rightfully so. But then if you do what you ended up doing, then people will say, well, the best option would be to test both. But you're creating twice as much work to get the same outcome. And the people who aren't extremists get nothing out of it other than just a bloated content piece. So it's just an unoptimized way of getting the message across.
That's right. I think in these sorts of videos, I want to sort of use and portray configurations that are sort of things I would recommend people to use, or sort of things like, if I've made content previously saying things like I would play games with DLSS 4 enabled, or I would use it over TAA, and I'm making a content piece about the game itself and how it looks and that sort of thing, I think it'd be pretty disingenuous for me to then go back and start testing like native versus native if I've already said an opinion otherwise, which is sort of showing like I wouldn't have played this game this way.
Yep.
So, yeah, I mean, it could have been for science testing and stuff, but ultimately, yeah, the conclusion of the video is the same. And
that's the real takeaway. It doesn't matter how you went about it. Out of those two options, the conclusion's the same. And the conclusion is actually identical. So it's not one conclusion would be a little bit more extreme than the other. The conclusions would be identical. So it doesn't matter. It's just silly. I was honestly, I wasn't surprised to see the comments, because when you use DLSS, I'm like, straight away I was like, there's going to be some complaints about that. I didn't expect to see the degree of complaints I saw. That took me back. That was pretty crazy.
Let's talk about our joint crime of talking about APUs in the podcast last week. So I think the issue that people had with our discussion was focusing too much on the socketed APUs when we were sort of talking about how APUs are sort of irrelevant for current desktop gaming. We focused largely on the 8700G and that sort of thing. And we didn't focus enough on AMD's the Ryzen AI Max Plus 395, which is their Strix Halo APU, which is currently available in some mini PCs and laptops. We sort of glossed over this, but we saw an overwhelming number of comments sort of saying, well, not overwhelming, but there were certainly many comments suggesting that that particular product is actually a very viable solution, that you can currently buy it for reasonable prices, that it is competitive with desktop gaming solutions, and that this does show, like, this is kind of the counterpoint to what we were saying, because we were saying APUs have not and do not to this day show a path forward and show
Which
that
is
they will
true.
be viable for desktop gaming in the future.
And all
Which
of
is
those
true.
counterpoints are wrong. Like, it's not readily available. It's not by any means cost effective. I mean, yeah, you can order like a framework desktop motherboard. So I guess in that sense, it is readily available, but there aren't like heaps of options, especially here in Australia. Like I looked at acquiring one. It wasn't terribly easy to do so. You generally had to import something.
So yeah, people were upset that we didn't sort of use that example to sort of counter the whole, this is the future of gaming sort of angle, because apparently this is a really good system. But you actually looked into this after we did the podcast a bit to sort of see how good is this part? Like, people have benchmarked and tested it. So did you want to run through that?
It's just to recap though, our entire stance on it had nothing to do. I'm not here to argue whether APUs are the future or not. I don't care to have that argument because it's just silly, right? Like you're arguing about something you can't prove, and you actually have you're guessing as to the future of PC gaming. So there's no clear indicators of where it's heading. You might think there is because DDR6 memory is going to make APUs better. Like, again, I've been doing this job for over 20 years. I've been hearing the same argument for 20 years. And that isn't to say that in another 5 or 10 years, those arguments won't bear some fruit, but so far they haven't. And our argument essentially is, first of all, you shouldn't be arguing for such a configuration anyway, because it's not flexible. It doesn't offer an upgrade path. It's worse than what you currently have available. It's not the direction you should wish PC gaming to go in. That's my opinion. I don't know if you agree with that, Tim.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
And it's, to this date, never been cost effective, and the performance is underwhelming, and that includes the Max Plus 395. That thing sucks. I know that's going to offend some people, but in terms of a dedicated gaming solution, it sucks. It may be technically impressive, absolutely. The power efficiency and what you can get out of a small form factor is mind-blowing. So it is very technically impressive. Maybe to the sort of same degree that like ray tracing demos have been technically and visually impressive in the past, but it's not something I believe you would want to buy or use in place of existing modular desktop gaming PCs. So as an example, you can buy the framework desktop motherboard AMD Ryzen AI Max Plus 395 for $2,289. So close enough to $2,300 Australian. So that's a fair bit of money for a start. That's by no means a budget system, but that's just for a bare bone. So that means you got to buy a case, power supply, storage, operating system, and even a 120 millimeter fan to stick on the heatsink. So I don't know how much you're going to spend on a case, power supply, storage, operating system, and all that sort of stuff, but
it's a few $100 minimum, yeah.
So for the exact same price as that bare bone, and we're not sponsored by PC Case Gear or anything like that, but I'm going to use PC Case Gear as an example just because we're familiar with their website and the systems they offer. We've had some before. They're very good. PC Case Gear have the Solaris 5070 gaming PC for $2,300. So the same price as the bare bone. In that system, you're getting a Ryzen 5 9600, a GeForce RTX 5070, a 2 terabyte SSD, a 750 watt PSU, and a mid-tower case. It looks really nice, like it's a well-made system, with Windows 11 pre-installed and configured. All drivers done, all updates done. Install your game and play. It's like turnkey, I guess is a term you could use for that. So, and I can tell you which one of those two will be faster and better for gaming. The PC Case Gear system is significantly faster. You're probably looking at more than twice as fast for gaming performance, and all of the components can be upgraded. You're on the AM5 platform. You could slot a 9800X 3D in there if they get cheaper. You can obviously go to a next generation GPU when they come out. It is a fully modular, upgradable, current generation PC for the same price as the bare bone. And to show how absurd this comparison is, PC Keski have the Revolt, or gaming PC. So it has a 7800X 3D processor and a 9070 XT Hellhound for $2,900. So it's 26% more than the bare bone. I would say no more than 20%, a 20% premium there once you configure the bare bone. So as I said, 7800X 3D, 9070 XT, 32 gigabytes of DDR5 6000 CL30 memory, 2 terabyte SSD, and then it's an awesome looking gaming system. It's in a Fantex XT View case. You get a Fantex 360mm IO, 6 Fantex M25 fans, the Fantex AMP GH850 power supply. Again, Windows 11 installed and configured, ready to use. For a 20% premium, that is well over twice as fast, that system. So when you're talking about, again, for dedicated gaming, even something like the Max Plus 395 makes no sense. And I guess to try and help put it into context, because I don't know, Tim, do you think people have an unrealistic sense of how powerful this thing is for gaming?
I think it's two factors. I think it's an unrealistic the unrealistic sense of how powerful it is, and thinking that it's more affordable than it really is. I think it's a double whammy on those fronts. I think the general APU performance is probably confused a bit because most of the testing is done in laptop form factors.
Mm-hmm.
So when you get in something like a Max Plus 395 laptop, you're comparing it to things like, I think Jared's Tech compared it to like RTX 4060 laptops.
I was going to touch on that.
And those sort of things, which again, then you have to, the 4060 laptop is not necessarily the same as the 4060 desktop. And so then
slower,
So then you have to go through and figure out, well, how do those laptop parts compare to desktop? And then on top of that, I think there's this thought that, okay, so the APU is in this laptop, which costs a few $1,000s, but that's typical for laptops, right? They cost thousands of dollars. Desktops, you can buy one for, maybe 1,000 US or whatever, and you get reasonable components.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then people think, well, okay, if you strip away all the laptop stuff, like the screen, the keyboard, the chassis, and you just give it as a component that you could buy, surely that would be an affordable thing to purchase, right? Like just the APU plus the soldered memory and motherboard, surely that's cheap, right? And then it turns out that actually that's not true either, that it is quite an expensive combination of hardware. And yeah, I'm sure it isn't actually costing AMD 2,300 Australian dollars to manufacture all these things. There's probably a pretty good markup on that sort of thing, but it's both those two things. So it just makes it a really unfavorable comparison once you start actually dialing in the numbers.
Yeah, well, I mean, I just had a look then. GMK Tech, they're a mini PC builder. They will sell you a 64 gigabyte RAM, 1 terabyte SSD version of an AI Max. It's a full blown PC. It's got storage, case, power supply, the whole lot. And that, I think probably without shipping is like $2,300. So only a little bit more than the framework board, but it's still like for a mini PC, that's a lot of money. Again, like it's nearly as much as these high-end desktop PCs I'm talking about from PC Case Gear.
Yeah, the performance of this part, realistically, I think the best case is probably around RTX 4060 performance.
Yep. Yeah, definitely right.
I think you've listed here in our notes, Daniel Owen has done some testing of this particular part, Borderlands 4, high preset, native 1440p, 25 FPS. So that was slower than the 4060 and Intel's Arc B580. And so the actual comparison for that performance are sort of your entry-level gaming pre-builts at places like PC Case Gear, where they'll put in things like 4060s, not 5070s, which are obviously significantly more powerful. And this has been the challenge across APUs forever, right? It's that, yeah, you can scale up the APU. It's theoretically possible. AMD's showing you that you can scale it up to create a more powerful version than something like an 8700G. But then the economics of it start becoming much more challenging. They start falling apart. And while maybe they would be able to offer like 5070 type performance in an APU that would match that PC K-SCII system that we're talking about, you're just adding layers of cost on top of that again and again and again. And over time, this is always what we have seen to date. And again, maybe it'll change in the future, but it's whatever level of performance that an APU offers, it is cheaper to do so with discrete, separate, upgradable hardware. And so for AMD's challenge here is, if they want to offer this as a competitive gaming platform, and to go back another layer, we were talking about this in relation to the Intel plus NVIDIA deal where they're making future products. The challenge they have to make those, relevant to gaming desktops and to disrupt the desktop market and have that deal make any impact on gaming desktops, they have to make these like massively cheaper, like way, way, way cheaper than they actually are. And maybe that's just not something that first of all, they're probably not interested in it because they largely sell these for AI. That's my understanding.
Yep.
And then on top of that, it seems not as feasible to make it affordable.
No, not at all. So as I said, the GMK Tech mini PC, you're looking at about $2,300 for that. For that to make sense for a gaming, dedicated gaming machine, not AI or whatever else you might have in mind, just we're strictly talking about gaming here. For that to make sense, it would have to be more than $1,000 cheaper. Because for about 1,300 Australian dollars, you can buy a 4060 or a 5060 gaming PC. So the CPU side of things may not be as powerful, but overall for gaming, it will be more powerful. So even then, if you take $1,000 off, you're probably coming in just a bit slower than a desktop PC.
Yeah.
Is it worth forgoing the ability to upgrade components like the CPU and graphics card or the CPU and the GPU for that? So realistically, again, going back to what we were talking about last week, for these things to be viable and make sense outside of you think they're cool and they're like really neat, for them to actually make logical sense, probably around $1,000 would be the most, a Max Plus 395 mini PC. Yeah, $1,000 is the most they could charge for that to make sense. So again, I get these videos hyping them up and they're technically very impressive and they're exciting and people think it's giving them a glimpse into the future and what can be possible. No, really all it's taking is the current level of technology we have now, cramming it together, and that's what you get, a really expensive, very sort of mid-tier performance package. I don't know. I just that's what it is at the end of the day. It's a very expensive, underwhelming gaming PC.
Yeah, I mean the reason these things are cool and exciting should be for mobile platforms. There's no doubting that these are interesting and exciting things for handhelds and laptops and that sort of thing. And that's because the whole advantage to making this sort of APU is not from the performance side of things. Mm-hmm. And this is where I guess people get confused about the APU angle, comparing to desktops, is, what is the actual design goal of an APU? It's not meant to compete with discrete desktop hardware. Like, they have discrete desktop hardware for a reason, is because it's more powerful. They make it so that you don't need as many components in your mobile system, which saves space and potentially power as well. So that is the advantage of making these sort of large APUs, is that you can put them in a handheld device. You can't put a 5070 desktop discrete graphics card that's upgradable into a small handheld system. So obviously Strix Halo makes sense. I mean, the Strix Halo handheld is a little ridiculous, but more sort of smaller designs, but laptops as well, right? Like, there's the push for and we've talked about this, and I've talked about this with Jared. The whole point of getting a laptop should be that it's portable, that you can take it from place to place, so that you're not buying these big, chunky, thick laptops that make no sense, where you may as well just have bought a desktop instead. Mm-hmm. Strix Halo, it theoretically enables those more portable 13, 14-inch thin and light laptops that you can put in a backpack, take around, do gaming on away from power, and that sort of thing. That's what it's designed for. It's not designed to compete with PC K-SCII's 5070 gaming PC. It's just not designed for that. And why they've put it into these mini PCs and desktop PCs that you can buy, I'm not 100% sure. I think for a lot of use cases, it doesn't make sense, even for just like your office type stuff. Like
I don't know what it makes sense for.
productivity.
You would buy the cheap versions, right? That like clip onto the back of your monitor. Like that you can get them for like 300, 400, 500 Australian dollars.
The only use case I've seen that makes somewhat amount of sense, and you have to forgive me, I'm not a major AI expert. My understanding is that you can pair things like the Max Plus 395 with large amounts of memory, way higher than 64 gig. You can pair it with like 128 or 192 gigabytes.
Very expensive to do. So 128 is the highest I've seen.
Yeah. So
you're looking at like 3,000 Australian dollars for the 128 gig configuration in the mini PC.
So that's the whole point, is so that you compare 128 gigabytes of memory with the GPU. So if you're wanting to buy a discrete desktop card, you're looking at a 5090 does 32 gigabytes of memory. And if you want like 96 or whatever, you have to go to NVIDIA's absurdly expensive Pro Series GPUs. And then to get 128, that's not even possible as far as I know in the workstation add-in cards. So AI models, some of them are extremely large, like they take up well above 32 gigabytes of memory. And so with a framework system, or something using the AI Max Plus 395 with lots of memory, you can start putting in these large AI models. That is the only thing that makes sense for these sort of desktop platforms. If the model fits inside the memory capacity of a discrete GeForce GPU, that would be faster. So you would just do that. But there's obviously some configurations where memory is more of a limiting factor than the compute performance. And so this AI Max system might make sense. But it's not something I'm overly familiar with. I'm just going off what other people are saying about these systems. I don't know where that's been tested and proven to be true.
Sure.
But,
I mean, at the end of the day, we're staying in our lane and we're talking about APUs for gaming.
All right, let's move on to another topic, because I think we've covered our APU sort of stuff again.
I have.
It'd be funny, maybe one day on the podcast we'll actually agree with the commenters and we'll go back on our opinion, but today's not the day.
For APUs?
For APUs or testing Borderlands with DLSS or whatever.
Well, I mean, again, with the APUs, we're not saying anything about the future of APUs. We're just saying, to date, they haven't made sense. And logically, given our understanding of computer hardware and all of these things, for gaming, it doesn't really make sense to combine those two things. There are certainly advantages to doing so, absolutely. But I think when it comes to the finances and the flexibility, it ultimately doesn't make sense to not. But again, we're not saying there's not a future where it won't make sense, but at least right now, and certainly I would think you probably agree that for the foreseeable future, they don't make sense.
Yes, I think when we're saying like we're not really talking about the future, we're not talking about 5 or 10 years into the future. We don't really know about that. I think in the next couple of years where we sort of have some visibility over, like you can sort of see like what sort of technology is going to be available, what's the sort of, stuff they can put into these designs, what do we currently know? The short term, it's not looking like APUs is going to be a thing.
It's an uphill battle anyway. We're pushing shit uphill on this one, because if the Max Plus 395 was announced, people would be losing their minds, saying entry-level gaming's dead, blah, 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 so on and so forth. The problem is they're saying that now, and you can actually just go look at it online.
Yep.
Which tickles my brain a little.
All right, let's talk about Intel's.
I feel it's like the thumbnail I did recently was Mugatu, and it was like I feel like I'm taking crazy pills from Zoolander. That's me when I was reading all these, but you guys don't understand. Blah, blah, blah. The Max Plus 390, I'm like, it's over 2,000 Australian dollars. That's a lot of money. Anyway.
Yeah. Let's talk about
Move
Intel.
on, Tim. Move on. You're like trying to move on, and I'm like, keep moving on, Tim.
Let's actually depart the station now. Intel has partially solved the Arc B580 overhead issues in some games. I found your video a couple of days ago on the Hardware Unbox channel very interesting. don't know whether you want to talk about this too much more, because obviously people can go and watch the video. But it seems like the CPU overhead fix has sort of been applied selectively. So some games have received improvements, Spider-Man being one of those games where you saw quite significant gains. Do you reckon this is something they can fix across like all of the titles, or are they sort of going about it game by game and sort of tweaking, noodling around in each one?
Yeah. So first of all, I have no additional insight into this, and it wasn't even something that was put on our radar by Intel. So a little bit of quick backstory. Basically, you and I talked about the B580, the B570 finally hitting MSRP and actually being in stock.
Yep.
And then we discussed whether or not that makes it a viable option. Is that exciting now? You can buy a 12 gigabyte GPU for $250 US. That seems pretty good, but then the landscape has changed significantly since we first evaluated the B580. So I was like, probably got to reevaluate it. And the elephant in the room is the overhead issue. So I would probably have to start by seeing where that's at, because if the thing still tanks badly in performance in some games, and I was expecting that to be the case in newer games like Borderlands 4 that are very CPU intensive, then it's not really a product you can recommend. So the video that I released wasn't exactly what I wanted to release, but it was like one of those developing stories. And while I'm sure people will be like, well, you shouldn't have rushed out, you should have spent more time doing this, that, and the other thing. For me, the story was the fact that in any capacity, this can actually be addressed, and it was in a meaningful capacity. So I feel like that was the news story. And I had it confirmed by Intel in writing that, and I didn't tell Intel which driver version I found that these game optimizations appeared. I just told them that I've been doing some testing over the weekend with the older drivers. The performance in certain games, namely Spider-Man Remastered, is horrific. And oddly, I've gone back and forth multiple times now. When I load up the latest driver, the performance on older CPUs is considerably better. What the hell? Like, what's going on there? I've heard nothing from you guys. There's nothing in the patch notes. Nothing's been announced. Am I seeing a repeatable bug here that makes absolutely no sense to be a bug, or is what seems to be the answer that you've actually solved this CPU overhead problem? And they came back like, yeah, we solved it in a few games. We're working on it on a per game basis. So it sounds to me like, yeah, it is like a hardware level issue, sort of like what AMD used to have with GCN for DirectX 11 titles. And that's why they really pushed Mantle low level API stuff, because they had to do so much driver optimization work to get the most performance out of the GPU. That seems to be exactly where Intel's at. So by default, with little work on their end, in a lot of titles, depending on the title's behave and game engine, all that sort of stuff can be very suboptimal. That requires Intel to go in and start optimizing. Now, I don't know, is it a situation where they had someone working on it in some capacity for 5 months and they've just worked out how to get around it? And can what they've learned in that 5 months now be quickly applied to other games as the problem crops up? Like, is it a sort of similar fix, let's say, for Unreal 5 games opposed to whatever? I don't know. And the answer is I have no idea. I have no additional insight. Intel is very bad at communicating on this stuff. They don't really give us any info. And prior to my video going live, everybody, myself included, was working under the assumption that this was a hardware level issue that they would have to fix with future refined architectures. And while that is true for the hardware level, there is actually a way to solve it at the driver level, which we've now seen. So that was massive news. But basically, the way the video was formatted and didn't probably make a whole lot of sense in the end was because my initial goal was just to, first of all, start from the start. I did not expect this to be fixed in any shape or form. I think that's fair, right?
Yeah.
Because we'd heard nothing. No one online had said anything. I expect to find the same miserable results in games like Spider-Man Remastered that I found 5 months ago and 6 months ago and so on and so forth. So my goal was, let's see how all these new, more demanding games behave on the B580, because we already know like Borderlands 4 runs like crap on a higher end CPU. So I expected, man, when we start using like a 5600, it's going to be real bad. So the initial configuration was get the Ryzen 5 5600, get the Ryzen 7 9800X 3D, compare the 9060 XT and B580 across those two CPUs in multiple games at like more CPU sort of demanding quality settings and see where things fall. And I got like 10 games in and there was no evidence of a CPU overhead issue. Like, wow, Borderlands 4, okay, a couple of other demanding new games, no, the issue's not there. I'm like, that's great news, but a bit unexpected. And then I thought, well, I know Cyberpunk, the section of the game we test with the high crowd density, that was always a problem. And we were able to like screen record that, show that side by side, that was a real problem. Went and tested there. No evidence of a CPU overhead issue. So I was like, that's what? What's going on? Like, I know that game has had massive updates since I last tested it. So I thought, is there something to do with that? Have they optimized in CPU usage or the way the game? I don't know. And then I thought, well, one game that hasn't changed and was an absolute cluster was Marvel's Spider-Man Remastered. So I loaded that up, and lo and behold, the B580 was able to match the 9060 XT using the 5600. And more crucially, the performance from the 9800X 3D didn't drop relative to the Radeon GPU. If it actually came together, which is what you'd expect when you see a CPU bottleneck. So that had me very confused that I was no longer able to see what I was seeing 5 months ago. So at that point, I'd finished all my testing, and I thought, well, what the hell's going on here? I can't just release this video and be like, it's not a problem anymore, even in the games where we proved it to be a problem. I sort of have to go looking for answers. And that's where I downloaded I think I downloaded like 30 driver revisions and started, DDU. That process takes a while, reinstall, test. So I rolled back like 4 drivers and kept getting the same great performance. I was like, what the hell? And then I think it was like the 5th driver I rolled back and it ran like crap. And then I was like, okay, that's interesting. So I DDU'd that driver, reinstalled it, ran like crap. Uninstalled it, installed the newer driver, ran well. And then I went back through the drivers. And like the original review driver was even worse than like they made it a little bit better initially, but not much. And then they've made it like, I think it was 36% better recently. So that's sort of how we got to that. But what was interesting about that was as well, if you did a driver test and only used a 9800X 3D, you'd find that the older drivers that had the overhead issue deliver the same performance as the newer driver. It's not until you go back and use an older CPU. But then with the Ryzen 5 2600, it's still very bad in a lot of games. So there's another...
So it's like they've minimized the CPU usage by some degree, but not a lot.
Yeah.
So it still does use the CPU, just it's using it less to do whatever it needs to do.
Yep. So it's like mitigates the effect on more of the mid-range, but then when you go down low and you're like heavily CPU crippled, that's when the gap widens again to GeForce and Radeon. And part of that is to do with PCI Express. So when you go down to PCI Express 3.0, you will lose more performance with the B580 than you will the Radeon or GeForce GPUs, but nowhere near to the degree that explains why the 2600 is so bad. So there's still, a percentage of that, maybe 20% of the overall problem could be PCI Express, but the other 80% is the CPU overhead. Combine the two and you just get, it amplifies the problem. So yeah, it's massive news that they can essentially eliminate the problem entirely on a Ryzen 5 5600, because that really, opens up the amount of CPUs that can optimally use something like a B580, whereas before we ran into a number of severe problems with the Ryzen 5 5600.
And that'll be a common combination as well, considering we're talking about a $250 GPU.
It's that CPU sold in massive volumes. Very, very popular Ryzen CPU for sure. Whereas the 2600, there's still a lot of them out there. It's still a popular CPU, and there'll probably be people that want to pair with that particular model. And I haven't tested like the Ryzen 5 3600, but yeah, the point is it's not entirely solved, but it is fixed to a rather substantial degree. So, and again, that's something we didn't think was going to happen. So that's massive news. And
hopefully they can roll it out to other games. or at least a more substantial number of games.
Yes. Yeah, that would be good. And again, at this point in time, I sit here not knowing actually I'd have to, if I knew what I knew now, and again, I said I released the video because this is important information, the fact that that can be fixed in any capacity. But if I knew all of this ahead of time, like if Intel had ever announced these game-specific optimizations that solve or largely solve the overhead problem for a wider range of CPUs, let's say in Spider-Man Remastered, I would have changed the configuration. Like I would have tested the way I did, but I would have tested with the older problematic driver and the new driver with the 5600 and all of these games, because we probably would have seen with the old driver, like, Cyberpunk and stuff, suffers, and maybe Borderlands 4 does. But the problem with that, as well as people ask why I didn't do that, I was targeting new games. So some of those games were released after those drivers. So if you go back and you test a pre-release driver on Borderlands and the performance is bad, what conclusions can you really draw from that? Like, yeah, maybe it's the CPU overhead problem, or maybe it's just the fact that it's not a game-ready driver.
Yeah,
so
that's right. Yep.
That complicates the issue as well, which is why I focused on Spider-Man Remastered, because that was a game that A, was massively problematic, and B, was released prior to those problematic drivers, and even the release of the B580. So it was a perfect game to look at it.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, fingers crossed that whatever fix has worked for that specific game and a couple of others would be widely applicable. Because again, because they haven't announced anything, we don't actually know what the fix was targeting. Maybe it was some specific thing that game did poorly, or whether it was more of a broad fix. We just don't know. And I imagine part of that is they don't really want to. It's kind of like, do they admit that there's a problem in these games and then say that they've solved it? Because it's kind of, you're still admitting that there was a problem previously that you guys that might have bought the card didn't know about, and now we fixed that problem, but then you didn't tell people about that problem before. So that's always a tricky thing when it comes to that sort of bug issue.
That's the sort of annoying thing though with working with Intel or just reviewing Intel products, is that when Hardware Canucks published their findings, I sent them to my Intel contact and said, I'm looking into this. And they pretty much admitted straight on the spot, yeah, we're aware of this. Like they knew it releasing the product, which is why the product had those supported CPUs.
Yeah.
Like this didn't it didn't catch them off guard. They knew that this problem was there. They just didn't advertise it, and they thought a way to minimize the problem or avoid it, hopefully entirely, would be to say that the B580 is only designed for whatever it was. I think it was like Ryzen 3000 and Intel something or other. And a lot of like Intel fans used that to defend the B580. But at the end of the day, it's all good and well for them to have a CPU support list somewhere on the internet. But that kind of stuff, apart from maybe even resizable bar, which is still like you're giving them a bit of slack there, the majority of budget gamers looking at buying a B580 aren't like, ooh, so what's the CPU support list and what BIOS-enabled features do I need for my... No one's doing that, right? They buy a GeForce or a Radeon GPU, they stick it in their system, and they hope that the performance is a lot better. They don't go scouring through the specifications and compatibility stuff. It's got a PCIe slot, or a PCIe fingers that goes in the slot, done, install the driver, and away you go. So I think they thought that, that would help. But when I emailed them, basically they said, because I gave them the example of Spider-Man Remastered, and they confirmed, yes, Spider-Man Remastered we have released game-specific optimizations for, but they didn't tell me any other games. They said, and other games, like there are some other range of games that we've solved or applied this. They'd never said solved, that we've applied these optimizations to. And I suppose I could have pressed them and said, well, can you give me a list of the games? But this was late on a Sunday, and basically I just wanted to show the Spider-Man Remastered stuff because it was the worst example we found previously. A bit more transparency with reviewers would be good. But like I said when I started this point, was the fact that they straight away confirmed the Hardware Canucks data was accurate. And then when I did further testing with, Ryzen 5 3600, 5600, 7600, and showed that depending on the game and stuff. And they're like, yeah, no. They go, look, it's not a widespread issue though. You're only going to see bad results in a select few games. That's just what it is. We're looking into it. We're seeing if we can fix those games. But yeah. So they confirmed it as accurate data, as a real bug, privately to reviewers that reached out to them. But then publicly they said nothing. And then when they did say they made that public sort of, I don't know what you want to call it, statement on their community, like what is it, their like official forum or something?
Yeah.
They were like, we're aware of reports and we're looking into it, which is like not acknowledging that it is a problem or anything like that. But they're acknowledging that they're aware of reports, I guess. That's as much as they said. So they don't have to like acknowledge the problem. They're just like, yeah, we've heard people talking about that, so we'll have a gander and see what we find.
Bit of a cop-out on that sort of weasel word sort of statement. But
yeah, which is annoying because 5 months prior, they're like, oh yeah, that's definitely a problem. But it's not a problem in a heap of games, so, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
It's just a problem in some games. Don't make a big deal out of it. So anyway.
So also on Hardware Unboxed this week, and while we chat about on this podcast right now, actually, Steve, you haven't watched this video yet, but going live tonight for us is the FSR 4. We've looked at it on RDNA 3 and RDNA 2 GPUs using the Int 8 version. So quite a weird situation there where AMD published the source code for FSR 4. Part of that included a second model. So the normal model that was already available, the FP8 model, and then this, I guess, work in progress Int 8 version, which allows FSR 4 to work on RDNA 2 and 3 GPUs. Some people, very clever people, beyond my knowledge of coding and compiling stuff, compiled the code into a DLL. You can now insert that into games and get FSR 4 working on those cards. So I've looked into it and I was quite impressed with how it works. And I think AMD should release this as a feature for all Radeon owners. Now that it's sort of been proven that it works, you kind of can't just like hide that away. It's you know,
whoopsie.
Oops, it's kind of like how people theorized a while back that there was like a DLSS version that would not require the tensor cores, but that was never really proven to any significant degree, I don't think.
Mate, NVIDIA's far too professional to make that kind of mistake. This is a mistake you'd expect AMD to make, but
yeah, I mean, maybe all along they were always going to release this, and so their hand wasn't forced. But yeah, I mean, now that it's proven, they kind of have to. So first of all, like the image quality is significantly better than FSR 3 and even XeSS. So a lot of people have been using XeSS, the DP4A version, on RDNA 3 GPUs just because they can. And it does deliver better image quality than FSR 3. This is another step up, especially if you're using like 1440p. Looks quite good at that resolution compared to other upscalers. So from like a quality perspective, looks good. It's quite taxing on hardware, so you don't get as much of a performance improvement as, you know, the normal version of FSR 4 or FSR 3 previously. So you do have to use more significant levels of upscaling, things like the balanced and performance modes instead of quality to get the same level of performance. But I think RDNA 3 owners who are stuck using FSR 3 would be very happy to at least have some better quality version. And then you can just, you know, you can choose your own sort of settings, whether you want more of a performance uplift, so use performance mode settings, or whether you just want the, you know, a small bump but want better image quality, then you can use FSR 4 Int 8. It isn't the exact same as the FP8 version, so it does look different. So it's maybe a downgraded model or something like that, but it's close enough that it's not like they're sort of going to be misleading people. Because my concern right from the start when there were sort of talks that this may happen is, you know, they just downgrade the version so significantly that you're kind of misleading people by saying, this is FSR 4, but, you know, we've kind of nerfed it a bit and, you know, it's not really giving you the same thing. This is pretty close and works in a very similar way. So I guess my question to you, even though you haven't watched the video, is will AMD release this feature? I did ask AMD and they sort of gave no comment. We're not really talking about that. FSR 4 has been a big selling point for RDNA 4 GPUs. So, you know, will they actually give gamers this feature, or do you think they will hide it away for longer?
Predicting what AMD is going to do is very difficult. Like, again, like I said, like NVIDIA is very predictable. You know what they're going to do.
If this was found, they would not release it.
Yes. AMD could do anything. That guessing AMD's next move is not a job I would want. Historically, AMD has caved to community pressure. And I think that would still work here because Radeon isn't in like a dominant position like say Ryzen is. And I mean dominant in like retail sales, for example. Whereas RDNA 4 has certainly done significantly better than, I don't know, any other Radeon generation I can remember. But they're certainly not in a position where, you know, they can afford to upset the community. So I think if you see enough, you know, Reddit posts and social media posts and sort of like, you know, when they tried to axe AM4 support.
Yeah. And they were like, there's technical reasons, but then actually they weren't. Like 2 days later, they're like, nah, those technical reasons, we've solved them, all good.
Yeah. Yeah. We made a video saying BS on the technical stuff and then they walked that back quickly. So I think if there's enough pushback from just the general enthusiast community, that would probably be enough to see them, you know, change if they had plans not to release it. I don't know if they're that worried about RDNA 4 sales because can you even buy RDNA 3 GPUs anymore?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think it would be the only angle would be
upgrading.
Yeah, upgraders. Like, is this going to stop someone from upgrading to RDNA 4? But does it matter?
There's no way. Like, if they would have already done it by now to get FSR 4 if they hadn't. Now it doesn't make sense. And then if you're talking about people further back, then that doesn't change anything either because they wouldn't be buying RDNA 3, they'd be buying RDNA 4. So I don't think this affects sales at all. No, if anything, it just bolsters brand perception, reputation, all that sort of stuff. And I would think it makes RDNA 3 owners who receive this improvement more likely to buy a Radeon GPU, say next generation, than feel shafted, especially now that they know, like the cat's out of the bag, they know AMD could make their product better. And I think whenever you're in a position where you can make, especially when it's an optional thing, if you have the option to try something that can make your experience better, it's anti-consumer not to make that option an option.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
yeah. I mean, I think FSR 4 it's a selling point against GeForce, really. Like, there'll be people upgrading, I guess, from old Radeon cards, but the real thing that AMD needs to win people over is the GeForce owners, because the Radeon number is so small that it's like that really isn't a significant factor. So I guess the good news is that even if AMD doesn't release it, you can just do a DLL swap now, which is quite easy. Like the process to get this video made was very straightforward. Didn't really require any significant hacks. With RDNA 2, you do have to do a bit of like driver stuff because the latest driver that's available is incompatible. It just doesn't seem to work with this FSR4 DLL, but you can do some driver stuff and get that working on RDNA 2. But outside of that, you just like copy a file and then you can just use it. So, and I had I tested, I think in the video I've used 4 games. I did try it in a few more. Didn't really have any like compatibility issues. There might be, but in the selection of games I tested, seemed to work just fine. So the fact that you, at least as things stand right now, you can use it if you are an RDNA 3 owner, but then obviously it would be better if AMD integrated as like a driver toggle feature like they've got for FSR 4 and RDNA 4. That would be obviously the optimal thing for people. But yeah, I mean, I think supporting the communities is the right way to go. And NVIDIA did that with the new DLSS 4 model. Like you can use that as far back as the 20 series, the first RTX cards is they got it working on there. And yeah, it runs slower. Like you're not getting the same experience as the latest cards, but they give you the option to use it. And so that's, supporting the community. And NVIDIA's done a pretty good job of that with those sorts of features. Again, maybe like multi-frame generation and frame gen maybe should come to previous gen cards. Not sure what the limits are there anymore, but at least as far as upscaling, which is, I guess, in my opinion, a more important feature, it goes way back. So yeah. The final topic I want to talk about is a hot topic, and I just wanted to get out, because this is something we don't really talk about too much, but I wanted to get your thoughts, Steve, on this.
How many hot topics can this one podcast have, Tim?
It's boiling over at this point with so yeah, gamers upset is the title of this one, really.
Yeah.
And gamers are upset at Microsoft because
Okay.
Microsoft has raised the price of Xbox Game Pass. And so this isn't a subscription that I personally use, but I know a lot of people in our Discord community are fans of Xbox Game Pass, the subscription that allows you to just download whatever games are included in the subscription. You pay a monthly fee, you access those games, you can play them. It's the tiering is a little weird. They've got different tiers for the console versus PC. So a lot of people are upset that the console slash cloud slash also PC for some reason version called Xbox Game Pass Ultimate, which gives you all the access to games, has gone up in price significantly from $20 US a month to $30 a month, which is a 50% increase. Massive annoyance to people trying to subscribe and pay for this. They've claimed that there's new features in that, but also for more PC relevant stuff is the PC Game Pass sub has also gone up from $12 US to $16.50. So it's about a 40% increase, which kind of not fully, I guess, for the PC version, but does significantly hurt its value proposition, because the whole idea is if you play a certain number of games by spending only $12 a month over the course of a full year, that's $144, right, over 12 months, which is about the price of 2 to maybe 3 like AAA titles. So, you know, reasonable value. If you play more than that number, you're probably getting a good deal. Once it goes up to $17, now you're talking about, well, do I need to buy now 4 or 5 games? And again, when you buy a game, you own it, right? So it's a bit of a different sort of thing there. So at least for especially the console version that's now gone up to $30 for the ultimate version, you're talking about a significant outlay over a yearly cost. And so it kind of, you know, doesn't make it great value. So the reason why I've never signed up to Game Pass is because I expected this to happen. So if I put all my eggs in the sort of subscription basket instead of owning the games, I figured eventually they would just try and make it more and more expensive over time, in which case eventually it would have just been better to buy the games themselves, especially because they just delete games. So I don't know, like, are you in favor? Do you like the idea of these subscription services? Or are you more of like a buy the games sort of person?
Well, I buy the games because of testing and whatnot. It's hard for me to say, having not really used a subscription service. It depends on the variety of games you play, because, you know what I mean? Like, some people play, you know, like I went from Call of Duty that I played for a few years, and maybe with StarCraft in there as well, and then did that for quite a few years. So I dabbled in a couple of other games in that period, but not dozens of games. Like, I don't jump from one game to the next game to the next game. I usually find a game that, you know, will occupy me for quite a long period of time. So for me, just buying the games has always made sense, being that type of gamer. But if I, you know, smashed through a campaign that was 10, 20 hours or whatever, and then moved on to the next game and that, then paying, you know, $100 Australian or whatever it might be for a game that you play for maybe a week or however long, then that's not great value. So yeah, a subscription service is awesome, I suppose, if you just churn through the titles and you're playing everything. But if you play Battlefield, you know, 80% of the time, then I don't think they make sense.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think, you know, there's been times where, you know, the cost of these subscription services has been so low that, you know, for example, previously, I believe there's been these services where if you did just play one multiplayer game, it could have been about the same price just to sign up to the subscription service. Because even if it was something like $10 a month, $120 a year, that is often the cost of the game plus its, you know, season pass or whatever, or DLCs or whatever. And those are all included when you sign up to those subs. So often, at least in the early days of these sub services, you just sign up because that makes sense, even if you play one game. But I think what a lot of people are annoyed about with this price hike is that it's sort of teetering on the edge of that. How many games do you need to play for it to make sense? And before the updated price, it was like, yeah, I might play 5 games a year, and that made sense because I was only paying for 2 or 3 games. But now that it's increased in price, now it's like, well, you know, how much value am I getting out of that compared to paying for the games individually? And I think there is that sort of number, like a typical number of games that people would play. especially for people interested in these sort of services, it probably isn't heaps of titles. Like, yeah, there's going to be the big users that play like 10 to 20 games a year, and yeah, it's always just going to be great value despite the price hike. But if there's a lot of people using the service that were only playing a handful of titles on it per year, and you sort of you tip over that line, it's going to make people very upset. So apparently this like crashed the Microsoft cancellation page or something, because a lot of people went to cancel it.
So good.
So that's very funny. But yeah, Xbox has been making some pretty interesting decisions, raising the price of consoles and stuff like that as well, which makes no sense. So yeah, this is one of those weird ones where I think it probably will impact a lot of people. And if that's the path that these, because this doesn't even just affect like Xbox Game Pass. If you look at the price of like Netflix or Amazon Prime or any of those streaming services, all of those, they just like creep up the price slowly over time as well. YouTube Premium, they do that. And eventually it gets to the point where, yeah, they don't make a lot of sense. And if that was the plan all along, like get people in while it's super cheap and then just sort of crush them slowly over time, it's never a sort of plan that I like to see. At least.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's a subscription service. I would sort of comes back to the comments before. I can understand people being upset because they had a service they appreciated, they valued, and they enjoyed. Now it's turned to shit. So I can certainly get the disappointment on that. But it's a vote with your wallet type situation. I'm always happy to do that. So I'd be like, see you later. It'd suck to lose a service that, again, you valued and enjoyed. But I wouldn't make much noise about it other than canceling my subscription. I'd just be like, see ya, done. Buy a Steam game or something, or play any of the number of free-to-play games that exist these days and move on, rather than have too much outrage about it, because it's pretty predictable, as you said, expected, and we're seeing it across the board with all these services. They get you in with a cheap, too good to refuse type offer, and then when they get a certain biomass, they're like, hey, you know that service you loved? Cop that.
Yeah, I think the issue that, you know, Microsoft will face with something like this is that there's many different other ways that you can buy or play games. Or as you said, you know, well, first of all, like a lot of games were never on PC Game Pass, so there's always that competition. But then on top of that, you, as you said, free to play games and stuff like that. So once the economics don't make sense anymore, you can just go back to buying games the old way. Whereas there's other services which are, you know, like maybe in some degree a bit more ingrained in how people use them and less competition. Like YouTube Premium, for example, there's no, like if you watch a lot of YouTube videos and that's your main platform, there's like no alternative. Like, yeah, I guess you could spend your money on other streaming services, but you're not getting the same content. Whereas with Xbox Game Pass, the game is the same as if you bought it on Steam. It's the exact same product. So it's kind of, other ways that they can get you in that maybe Microsoft is going to struggle a little bit more with this sort of Game Pass thing. But I think people are sort of more concerned about, you know, Microsoft obviously publishes and produces a lot of games, and this is one of the ways that they fund video games is through Game Pass, and then they make it bad value and people aren't interested anymore, then potentially the game franchises that people have loved that Xbox has made, like your Forza titles, Halo, that sort of thing, maybe that's under threat, because if Game Pass isn't viable as a business model, then there's no money for Microsoft to make those games anymore. So that's a difficult one for that side of things. But ultimately, yeah, as a consumer, the thing to do is vote with your wallet. So if you don't like the price hike, just unsubscribe. Luckily, as well, Microsoft actually does allow you to unsubscribe, unlike companies like Adobe, which does much more devious sort of things to get you to pay up when you unsubscribe, or the services where you have to call up to unsubscribe, which is terrible. So anyway, that's the Game Pass thing. Thought we should bring it up because Discord members love Game Pass a little bit. So let's take a break and we'll come back and talk about our boring lives. Right, Steve, impress me. What has been going on?
Not a lot, to be perfectly honest. The weather is still terrible. I had to laugh. Someone was educating us on Australian weather, saying that we have no idea what terrible weather is because it barely rains in Australia. And I was like, well, that's a very naive look at Australian weather. It actually rains quite a lot where I am. I'm in sort of a rain belt area. I think when we looked at it wasn't the rainfall I get here very similar to the wetter parts of the UK?
Yeah,
Because we were comparing that with Andy from eTechnics.
that's right. We were at a dinner and I was sort of saying that, yeah, I think there was some argument about the amount of rain that Australia gets compared to the UK, and it's actually can be comparable in some areas.
Well, yeah, and I was sort of saying to you, well, the UK, I think with the stats Annie was showing, it's more like they obviously get heavy rainfall, but it's more, generally speaking, like lighter rain over longer periods of time. Whereas here it's more the flood prone type of rain. It pumps down. We get a lot of rainfall in short periods. Having said that, though, recently, like it's raining right now. It's rained all day here today. It rained all day yesterday. We've had a very wet September, which was predicted. But we said in no uncertain terms we were complaining about the weather because it's been so windy. So that was the main complaint. It's hard to go outside when it's blowing sideways.
Yeah, I guess people forget that Australia is actually a massive country land-wise, and we do have quite a lot. Like, 90 or 80% of it is desert or whatever, which obviously doesn't get much rain, but there are a lot of other types of climate on.
If you looked at the average, mainland. Like if you were to determine the Australian weather by the average or something across the continent.
Yeah, it'd be pretty dry on average across the land.
You get a very skew. Like, I mean, you and I essentially live in different countries. We're in the same state. But our rainfall is so vastly different. We might as well be in completely different climates and countries. Like the data there is significantly different.
Yeah, that's right. So I think in the UK they usually get more rainy days than Australia, like Victoria in Australia, the state that we live in. But then the average rainfall can be similar, which indicates that on our rainy days, we get more rain. And we do benefit. We have quite a high number of sunny days and that sort of things. Average sunshine hours is high, especially in northern parts of Australia, and obviously the desert as well, if you want to count that. But like we have tropical climates, we have, temperate climates.
Yeah, it's why us Aussies have so many different ways to explain how it's raining. Like, it's chucking it down, and there's other ones I won't say on the podcast. So anyway, weather's still bad. Therefore, I haven't got outside much. I did mow the lawns once, so people will be excited to hear that. And when I engaged the blades at low RPM, for the first time, my mower chucked the belt. So the belt's starting to stretch a bit. So it took me 5 seconds to put it back on, but I had to tighten the chain a bit more. So that was some mower maintenance stories for you. And after that, it mowed just fine. But the grass is growing at an alarming rate now, Tim. So sort of getting to the point where we have to mow every couple of days. But again, the weather being bad, it's difficult to do that because you don't want to mow 5 acres of wet grass. Well, I've only got about 1.5 acres of wet grass because the rest of it's gardens, which is somewhat relevant for my story because if you recall, let's say 2 months ago now, I displayed my box fort building skills on the Hardware Unboxed channel with my B850 motherboard review.
Yes, yep.
And those skills came in handy yesterday because my daughter and her group of friends, there was like 9 of them in total, sort of like roughly half boys, half girls. They use sort of our place as a home base because we have, as I said, a relatively large property, got a lot of garden on it. It's kind of like a paradise for kids to run around and play hide and seek and all that sort of stuff. And they tried building their own like fort in the garden. Anyway, Zoe asked if I could get involved and help them build like a cubby house fort type thing in the garden. So Balin and I put aside an hour yesterday. It ended up being probably 1.5 hours. And I had some old building supplies like some pine and stuff in the backyard. So I built what could be best described as something you would find in the Borderlands series. Like, like if you took this fort and chucked it in Borderlands, it'd be like a set piece. So we deliberately built it that way, where it was just like chucking things together. Like it's all structurally sound and whatnot. But we built it down amongst the gum trees in like a secluded section of the garden. So it's quite a private area where they can all have a good time down there. And so they all had lunch down there and stuff. And I think they spent probably 4 hours down the garden doing that and running around and having a good time. So that was cool. So yeah, Balin and I got, I think to build it, we used a nail gun, some big batten screws, so a couple of impact drills, circular saw, reciprocating saw, and we just sort of stuck everything together. So it's got like a seating area with a table in the middle. and then we put some posts in, and like we made like a couple of false walls where they could stick branches down the walls and stuff to like pack them out. So they had fun doing that for a few hours. So
Cool.
yeah, a pretty epic fort, really. I was a bit jealous that I wasn't also 12 years old and can get involved. But Balin and I just went back to work and started benchmarking something while they had fun. But so that was my outdoor time, mowing the lawns and building a fort. So had fun doing both of those things. But other than that, yeah, it's been pretty ordinary.
Yeah, I mowed the lawns as well. Did some preparation, obviously, because, when it gets to springtime, things start to bloom. So I had to start, preparing some barriers and stuff. I think I talked about this last time on the podcast, but I actually did do it, went outside and sort of fixed up some of the rabbit and then insect barriers so that, on the trees where things are sort of heating up, my apricot tree's got all the little sort of green mini apricots that are sort of getting big. And usually the apricot tree fruit is ready late November, early December. So that's the first tree I sort of need to deal with, and then other ones as time goes on. So sort of been taking a few hours here and there to get out there and in between the rain. And it was actually hailing pretty hard the other day. So wanted to avoid that. But yeah, getting out there in between those sort of things and making my orchard ready for the season and veggie garden and stuff like that with things that only grow in the summer and springtime. So been doing that. But outside of that, I also on last weekend managed to watch the Fantastic Four movie, Fantastic Four First Steps. And so I thought I'd talk a little bit about the current MCU because
you're brave.
We always talk about this when one of these films comes out. So Fantastic Four First Steps was fine. It was, and that is a good review for Marvel at the moment because I was just looking through the list of this multiverse saga, the current saga of...
I gave up years ago.
Yeah, so apparently in 2026, they're releasing Avengers Doomsday, which will be the end of this current, as I said, multiverse saga of Marvel films. And I have watched most of them. So, going back, so this is sort of putting in perspective my Fantastic Four It's Fine review. So I watched Thunderbolts a while earlier this year, I think, and that was also fine. Like I was just like, haven't seen Captain America. Deadpool and Wolverine was pretty good.
I watched that. I did watch that. That was enjoyable. A little bit crazy, but yeah, enjoyable. I mean,
pretty good.
It was to be expected, so that was good.
Yeah, it's good characters. So yeah, sort of hope for the best on that. Those ones. Haven't seen the Marvels. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 was, again, fine to good sort of level. Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania was very bad.
I can't watch those. Well, I think I watched the first Ant-Man. It was like, and then I think I tried another one. I'm like, no, I'm out. Zoe enjoys them, I think. But yeah, I couldn't do them, so I haven't watched the latest one.
Yeah, Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, bad. Thor, Love and Thunder, very bad.
I watched that. That was ridiculous.
Yeah, it was hard to get through, especially because I liked Thor Ragnarok. And I
thought all the previous Thors were good.
Yeah, yes. I think maybe the first one I wasn't, or was it the second one? Either the first or second one I was like, Thor Ragnarok was good, same director, just I don't know what happened there. Something lost his mind, not sure, real bad.
Yeah, it was real bad.
Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, very bad. Spider-Man No Way Home was pretty good. Eternals, bad. Shang-Chi was pretty good. Black Widow was terrible. So most of these Marvel films, and normally I would have watched all of them. I haven't even bothered to watch a couple of those ones.
I've watched about half of those.
Yeah, so to get to a movie that's not a sequel with characters from previous Marvel movies like a Deadpool or a Thor or Guardians of the Galaxy that comes out and I'm like, yeah, that was fine. I watched that. It was not too bad. Pedro Pascal was good in it. He's a likable sort of character, and
the bar is now like, oh, I didn't hate that.
It really is that level. It was short as well. It went for less than 2 hours, so you're not sitting there. I think Eternals went for some ungodly amount of time, completely unjustified. Yeah, 156 minutes for Eternals, which is
See, Zoe really liked Eternals, so she would have been about 10 at the time. So it appeals to a 10-year-old girl, but that's probably about it.
I can hear it's really bucketing down at your place right now.
Isn't it? I
Yeah,
thought
it's
that was
crazy.
I thought that was my air conditioner for a second, but I'm like, I've turned that off. Yeah, it's really chucking it down. It's all right. I should be fine. We won't get washed away, hopefully. We're on top of a hill.
Yeah. So yeah, Marvel Cinematic Universe, like hopefully they can sort of stick the landing. They've apparently the next film coming out is another Spider-Man, then into Avengers. So yeah, Thunderbolts, like I said, was fine. So maybe they'll be able to resurrect this sort of series. But obviously the main problem was that they just made very uninteresting and just way too many movies. Like I look back in 2021, they released 4 Marvel movies, and then 2022 there was 3 of them. 2023 there was 3 of them.
That's okay if they're good, though.
But I think part of the problem is that because they were pumping out so many of them, they ran out of good people to make them.
Well, yeah.
Possibly, I don't know. They've made 3 of them this year. So.
I'm not saying there's not logistic problems. I'm just saying if they were good, there'd be no complaints, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, to be fair, I guess back in the better days of Marvel when they were doing, Avengers Endgame and those sort of ones, they did pump them out then. I think they just sort of ran out of steam a bit and sort of ran out of cool ideas because you always have to come up with some sort of like villain, and then the villains just get like the same, very samey or just bad.
That's all true, and also it's just the motivation and passion, and you're just doing it for the cash cow at that point. So
yeah. So Star Wars sort of has the same sort of problem, but then they're making a new, what is it, The Mandalorian and Grogu that's coming out at some point.
That's such a creative title. Based on the title alone, I have very low expectations. Hey, Tim, there's a new Mandalorian movie. It's focused around, we had that hit TV series. Do you remember it? Everyone liked season 1, and then it got worse as we went along.
Yep.
It had, the Mandalorian, and there was that little baby Yoda guy that we named Grogu. So we want to bring those 2 characters back and make like a movie, 2026 release. I think, people will be excited for that because it's the one good thing we've made in the last 10 years. Got title ideas, just pitch some ideas, and you're like, oh, The Mandalorian and Grogu, done, nailed, lock that in.
The only way it could be worse is if it was called like The Mandalorian Movie.
It's almost like they're like it's like Idiocracy. They're like, Star Wars fan dumb, have to convey message what movie is.
Yeah,
people like Mandalorian and Grogu. Like it's just anyway.
Yeah, honestly, I'm more excited about the film that's coming out after that, which is called Star Wars Starfighter or something.
I haven't heard of that.
Yeah, I think it's going to have Ryan Gosling in it as and it's going to be based, I guess, around like more of the ship to ship combat is what I would assume it would be about. I think it's still several years away. I'm not sure if they've even started filming it or whatever. But like The Mandalorian, like I would, if they came out and said we're making a Mandalorian movie after season 1, I would have been like, okay, maybe just make a second season. But hey, I'm pretty keen on that because season 1 pretty good. But then now that there's been like 3 seasons, and then they did like the Book of Boba Fett and stuff like that, which wasn't really The Mandalorian, but it was sort of related. And it was very bad. And so I'm kind of like, like I like Star Wars. I'll watch it, but I'm not like desperate to see that movie.
You never watched, and I requested it multiple times, and you've quite clearly denied my requests.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, what was it called?
Are you talking about The Acolyte?
The Acolyte. I've forgotten the name. We've talked about it like 6 times on the podcast. I deleted the name from my brain because, when you invest part of your life into something and it's like you sort of know you shouldn't be doing it. It's like taking drugs. You shouldn't do it, but you keep coming back and you're doing it for some reason. Not that I'm advocating for that, I say that I do it, but in this instance, I may have done something worse, and I invested time in The Acolyte, and I want Tim to suffer the way I did.
So I did download it onto my laptop to watch while I was in Europe, but then I just didn't get around to it. I had other content. I was like, I'll just do that instead, playing some games on the Steam Deck and stuff. So
doesn't help me at all.
It wasn't like I've just put that out of mind and I'm never going to watch it because your review of it made it sound so bad that I kind of have to see it for myself to sort of believe how bad it was.
I need you to.
So I'll get around to it at some point. But yeah, like I'm not exactly rushing out the door to watch any of the latest Star Wars content these days. it's very much, yeah,
Yep.
not great, a lot of it. So, yep.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that'll probably do it for this week's podcast. Thanks to everyone that's listened to the end as always. And we'll be back next week to talk about whatever random stuff comes up. Hopefully, comment section will go well for us. We won't commit any internet crimes and we can just go about things as normal next week. But yeah, obviously this week a bit different with some of the comments. So, yep, that'll do it for this one. If you want to support Hardware Unboxed, the podcast, all that sort of thing, we've got Patreon. If you sign up, you get access to all the benefits that Patreon provides, Discord community, all that sort of thing. We've got a podcast channel in there, but also you do get access to the supporter feed, which is ad-free and all that sort of thing. So yeah, that's it for this week. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.